Built in 1964 by Anchorage Shipyard of Warren, Rhode Island, the tour vessel Ethan Allen was of Dyer 40 fiberglass hull design. Originally named Double Dolphin, the 38-foot passenger vessel started service in 1965 under owner Whaling City Dredge and Dock Corporation out of Groton, Connecticut. Delivered unfinished, with Whaling planning to install their own canopy. According to the NTSB, Whaling contracted with Anchorage Shipyard for 2 additional vessels, requesting that they be similar in construction, appearance, finish, and quality to the Double Dolphin. The 2 sister vessels, Seahorse and Sea Lion, delivered in 1966, would each vary slightly in seating layout and canopy appearance, appearing to both initially have only bimini-type tops that, at least in these photos, were going unused and integrated into basic metal side railings. Whaling installed the Double Dolphin's canopy, featuring a fully framed metal and canvas style top, with thicker tubing than that of the sister vessel's railings, along with side panels. The vessel's primarily seeing use in and around the Groton area, mostly for sightseeing along the Thames River. The NTSB affirming in their report that all 3 had seen a mix of fresh and salt water in their first couple decades of service. In 1979, all 3 vessels were sold to Shoreline Cruises of Lake George, New York, a tour operator based exclusively on Lake George. They would add the same metal and canvas canopies to sisters Seahorse and Sea Lion, also renaming all 3. The Seahorse became De Champlain, the Sea Lion became the Algonquin, and the Double Dolphin would become the Ethan Allen. The small company would then expand their Lake George services by adding the much larger river cruise-style vessel Horicon in 1988. This multi-deck 85-foot wooden yacht, with its 200-passenger capacity, began to take center stage, capable of hosting larger venues and onboard events. In 1989, Ethan Allen received another canopy modification. This time the rather flimsy-looking metal frame and canvas replaced with a wooden, fully framed canopy, with a solid top and hinged plexiglass windows that fold up and out of the way, attaching to the ceiling when not in use. I've always wanted these stories to continue beyond where I can leave off, to find out what sort of justice, compensation, or in general, legal aftermath came as a result, which is why maritime and catastrophic injury lawyer, Attorney Tom, and I have teamed up to do just that. Stay tuned till later in this video for a message from Tom on our new partnership, a preview of his follow-up to the Ethan Allen, and why your justice matters. From the NTSB, because Shoreline Cruises intended to operate the 3 Dyer 40 model boats solely on New York state waters, the vessels no longer fell under Coast Guard jurisdiction and became subject to state oversight. De Champlain would receive a similar wood canopy conversion in 1990, and Algonquins would follow in 91. It appears, to me at least, all 4 vessels were meant to match in their aesthetics: dark green lettering and the thicker wooden canopy sporting a dark green on wood grain color scheme, making the smaller craft more similar in appearance to the larger riverboat. If you look up the Dyer hull design though, the large majority are recreational, fishing, or pleasure vessels, so when used as tour boats, they feature only a single continuous deck, with seating arranged to maximize space. It was around 2004 Shoreline Cruises added what would become their largest vessel, another cruiser named the Adirondack. Even larger than the 85-foot Horicon, the 115-foot-long Adirondack had a capacity of 400 and became a flagship of sorts. The 3 Dyer vessels remained available for private charters, straightforward sightseeing, and smaller group events. By 2005, tourboat Ethan Allen was powered by a 210 horsepower diesel engine, still the same length and width, at 38 feet long by 12 feet wide, and with its park bench style seating affixed to the deck, the vessel's capacity plate boasted a maximum of 48 passengers. The De Champlain also boasting 48 total, with a similar canopy and seating layout, even after modifications. And while Algonquin's original Coast Guard Certificate of Inspection, or COI, is nearly a duplicate of the other 2, showing 48 total as well, Shoreline's website from around 2004 makes multiple references to Algonquin being available for 30 guests or less. The Algonquin's canopy and seating arrangement appearing much different to its sisters by this point. The color scheme and styling appearing to match the fleet, but clearly different in its configuration, according to these photos. A slight difference I noticed from the Ethan Allen and Day Champlain was the Champlain had this sunroof-style transparent plexiglass down the center of its canopy, while the Ethan Allen did not. From the NTSB, the Ethan Allen was a New York State certificated public vessel, a category of powered vessels that is permitted to transport passengers or freight for commercial purposes solely on state waters." End quote. Because of them falling under state oversight only, Coast Guard involvement became non-existent. Factors we will cover later in this video. From Shoreline Cruises' website circa 2005. Enjoy a personalized 1-hour narrated cruise aboard the Algonquin, Ethan Allen, or Day Champlain. These boats travel closest to and cover more of the Lake George shoreline than any other 1-hour cruise boat on the lake, travel close to shore and capture the history and magnificent beauty of tranquil bays, secluded islands, and million-dollar mansions along the way. Sunday, October 2nd, 2005. It was a beautiful clear autumn day with temperatures in the lower 70s. Water temperatures a chilly 68 degrees Fahrenheit. From the NTSB report, according to the owner of Shoreline Cruises, in the 26 years that the Ethan Allen had operated as a passenger vessel on Lake George, it probably had made 14,000 trips and had never experienced a major incident. The typical route for sightseeing along the shore of Lake George saw the tour boats depart on a north-northeasterly course to end up cruising along the western shore. In the 1-hour-long tour, vessels turned back toward the eastern shore at Green Harbor and returned southward toward the Lake George Village docks, a roughly 7-mile journey on the water. Arriving by tour buses from Michigan, a group of senior citizens on the Fall Color Tour were a few days into their journey of autumn sightseeing across the region. The entire trip package was arranged by Shoreline Tours and Travel, an agency out of Ontario, very similar in name but not related to Shoreline Cruises of New York. The Lake George portion saw Shoreline's Ethan Allen and Day Champlain vessels booked for 1 hour each for their normal sightseeing route around the lake. This would be one of the last big days on the senior group's 7-day-long Fall Color Tour. These private bookings ensure that only your party is on the vessel, aside from the single operator. The first tour bus had arrived around 1:15 in the afternoon with 50 passengers. Ethan Allen would be first to embark. The vessel had completed 2 trips earlier that day, both reportedly uneventful. According to the NTSB, however, members of the senior group began to embark on the Ethan Allen through the port side door opening near the stern. In anticipation of viewing historical and other sites along the western shore, passengers began filling the 8 3-person benches along the port side of the Ethan Allen. According to the passengers, only about 7 to 10 people had boarded when the boat began to list noticeably to port. One of their members shouted out that someone had to sit on the other side of the boat. The vessel operator also advised passengers to sit on the starboard side. As people filled the starboard benches, the vessel began to level out. One of the passengers said that those boarding filled in where sitting space was available and that we had some large people in our group. She added that the group didn't seem to be balanced across the boat when everyone was seated. The vessel operator extended an invitation to board 2 more women. However, they later stated they declined to board because they thought the boat looked crowded. Another woman said that while standing in line to board, she noticed the vessel listing to port stating, "I decided it wasn't safe to be on, so I didn't get on. I told the others that I wasn't going." The vessel's hinged plexiglass windows, opened inward and able to be stowed overhead out of the way, would remain open since the weather was so peaceful. With 47 passengers and the 1 operator at his station, the Ethan Allen would get underway at 2:30 p.m. with 48 souls aboard. From the NTSB, the passengers described the conditions for the lake tour as beautiful and perfect, the lake waters calm. The only chop typically experienced in Lake George waters this calm was the wake from other boats. Wake meaning a track of waves caused by a vessel or object moving through the water. The waves, or essentially ripple effect, but on a larger scale, can vary depending on vessel size and speed, but also on how calm the water is it disturbs. The calmer the water, the more duration and distance the wake can travel, like throwing a rock into a quiet pond versus a raging river. Stability needs for vessels on these waters can, unfortunately, often be taken for granted when compared to those on the high seas, something we will discuss later. In this instance, it was common procedure for the smaller shoreline vessels to turn the bow toward the oncoming waves and minimize risk of rollover, and a routine occurrence for the past decades of Shoreline's operation on Lake George. The Ethan Allen, departing at 2:30 p.m., had made its way north along the western shore without incident. At around 2:54 p.m., approaching Kramer Point, the operator began making his right turn out of the bay to proceed around the point, when a vessel passing to their starboard side created a wake close enough to concern the operator, and as the waves approached, he turned to starboard even harder to meet the waves head-on. Witness testimony conflicts, but the primary wave, reportedly 2.5 to 3 feet high, first made contact at the Ethan Allen's starboard stern, moving forward along the length of the vessel, raising it up noticeably, and all throughout this process, the relatively sharp maneuver to starboard, combined with the timing of the wave, caused a significant list to port, which the vessel was not recovering from. As the list quickly worsened, passengers on the starboard side began to tumble over helplessly to port as well. From the NTSB, quote, falling onto the passengers seated on the port benches. The vessel continued to roll over, and several passengers were swept out the open windows. Both the operator and the survivors estimated that the vessel capsized in a matter of seconds. The accident occurred about 2:54 p.m. The Ethan Allen remained afloat upside down for several minutes. Several survivors described the conditions inside the Ethan Allen after it overturned as chaos underwater, total confusion. In the darkness, people were stepping on, crawling over one another. One woman said that when she attempted to swim toward the light, people were pulling on my legs to crawl up me, so they pulled me down. Survivors said that they never had time to retrieve life jackets. However, they also said that if people had donned life jackets, more fatalities would have occurred, because the only way for those trapped in the vessel to escape was to swim down and go through the open windows, which were now below water. One passenger told investigators that she initially was blocked by a plexiglass window, but was able to swim under it to escape the vessel. Once the boat occupants escaped, they clung to the overturned vessel on the surface. Several recreational boats were in the vicinity. Many of the boaters observed the capsizing and immediately proceeded to the site to render aid by throwing life preservers and flotation cushions to the survivors and rescuing them. The witnesses also called 911 on their cell phones to report the accident. After several minutes, the overturned vessel righted itself and then sank to the bottom of the lake, eventually coming to rest upright on its keel in 59 feet of water. Important to note also was the water temperature, as stated, a chilly 68 degrees Fahrenheit. According to the U.S. Coast Guard, cold shock can occur in water colder than 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Healthy individuals may succumb to cold shock through uncontrolled respiratory responses, while those with underlying cardiac disease may experience sudden death due to cardiac arrest or ventricular fibrillation or uncoordinated heartbeats. As the incident unfolded, 2 ambulances had arrived almost immediately, and Samaritan rescuers helped victims to them. Lake George Parks Commission dispatched 3 rescue vessels on the water that arrived at about 3:02 p.m. The Lake George Fire Department's chief, along with 3 rescue vehicles and 2 engines, were on scene starting at 3:04 p.m. and immediately set up an incident command post. Impromptu trauma centers were set up on shore for triage, and EMS personnel began prioritizing the most at-risk victims as they were brought to them. The local sheriff's office had dispatched 21 units, arriving by 3:06 p.m. A helicopter landing zone was immediately established at Green Harbor Beach, about a quarter mile from the command post. 15 more local ambulances had been dispatched and started arriving by 3:15 p.m. A local shore-based dive school had witnessed the chaos and offered their assistance immediately, but needed a ride to get as close to the scene as possible. A recreational boater was able to haul the group of 5 divers out there by 3:10 p.m. On scene, 2 of them immediately dove down to check the inside of the vessel. In describing the chaos, reports are a bit vague on whether the dive team was initially dealing with a now neutrally buoyant and partially submerged vessel, or a completely sunken vessel resting on the bottom. Searching amongst the personal belongings and debris, they were able to recover 15 victims, extracting them from their trapped positions inside. Over a period of about 24 minutes, they performed perimeter searches around the vessel, and then searched through floating debris to verify no other victims were unrecovered, and to pick up what personal belongings they could. The divers didn't have their own boat though, and the scene was becoming too chaotic for them to continue operations for their own safety. Diving operations were then turned over to Warren County Sheriff's divers, who eventually found one more trapped victim in the stern of the sunken tour boat. Of the 48 people on board, the operator and 18 passengers escaped physical injury. 6 victims suffered minor injuries, 3 were seriously injured, and 20 souls aboard were lost. It was nearly unthinkable, especially to the locals, that something like this could happen on Lake George. Initially, the investigation would be an uphill battle to say the least. The NTSB launched a 6-person investigative team, which arrived on scene quickly enough that they were present for the salvage operation, taking the vessel promptly into their custody at a nearby hangar. Ethan Allen was examined thoroughly, down to its components like bilge pump, steering functionality, propulsion, watertight integrity, and more, along with interviewing witnesses including the operator. Eventually ruled out as primary or secondary causes were weather conditions, operator fatigue, hull structure, steering and propulsion, and bilge pump operation. However, witness testimony and out-of-the-water examination of the vessel could yield only so many answers. The question of stability was still a major factor. From the NTSB report, to obtain a preliminary determination of whether stability, overloading, or both might have been factors in the capsizing, the safety board investigators arranged an SST of the De Champlain, or Simplified Stability Proof Test. Like the Ethan Allen, the De Champlain and the Algonquin had been based on the Dyer 40 boat design and built for the same owner. They had originally been under the jurisdiction of the Coast Guard, which certificated each of them to carry 48 passengers, in addition to 2 required crew members. When Shoreline Cruises purchased the vessels, they came under the jurisdiction of New York. State officials indicated that they established the same load restrictions, 48 passengers plus 2 crew members, for the 3 vessels, based on the certificates of inspection, or COIs, issued by the Coast Guard. After surveying the De Champlain and the Ethan Allen, investigators determined that the vessels were similar enough in design and construction that the De Champlain would yield comparable results from a stability test. The assessment was then conducted in accordance with the Coast Guard stability test criteria, which New York officials indicated the state would require for a public vessel like the Ethan Allen if its stability were questioned. The De Champlain being so similar to the Ethan Allen meant this would be the closest investigators could get to testing the stability of the stricken vessel. Unable to test the vessel itself since it was already compromised, potentially damaged by the sinking. The SST, or Simplified Stability Proof Test, would involve the NTSB simulating the empty conditions of the incident vessel on the De Champlain, then utilizing 12 test weight water barrels to replicate a load condition for 48 passengers. These barrels placed along the center line of the vessel's deck to check the overall affected freeboard first, then moving on to test the heeling moment, meaning the heeling moment can be caused by wind, by the centrifugal force in turning, by crowding of passengers on one side, by towing, or by the tension in the cable that links 2 vessels during operations at sea. In testing this, investigators would empty 8 of the barrels, placing them on the port side deck and begin refilling them. However, only about 3 of the plastic barrels were filled when the vessel reached the exterior freeboard marks, indicating the De Champlain's list was already nearing dangerous levels. This appears to have caught investigators off guard, and they quickly cut the test short as they didn't want to endanger themselves or the vessel. From the NTSB report, Because the de Champlain failed the stability proof test for the carriage of 48 passengers on a protected route, the safety board had reason to question the intact stability of the Ethan Allen for the carriage of 48 passengers. Subsequent investigation revealed that during the 40-year history of the Ethan Allen, the de Champlain, and the Algonquin, all had been modified by the addition of various types of canopies, but new stability assessments had not been done to determine the effects of the modifications on the vessel's stability. Now, further studies against Ethan Allen and experimentation on de Champlain bore out that the weight of each canopy caused the vessel to ride lower in the water, reducing reserve buoyancy. The higher center of gravity created by a canopy in general reduced the ability to resist overturning moments from forces such as wind, waves, and passenger movement. The wind profile created by each canopy, combined with that of the vessel itself, so greatly increased the overall projected lateral area and corresponding wind heeling moment of the Ethan Allen that it could not meet the required stability criteria. This testing and analysis determined that the Ethan Allen and subsequently the de Champlain with the wooden canopy could carry only 14 passengers, using the current regulatory standard of 140 pounds per passenger. In addition, investigators would uncover that not only did Shoreline's canopy modifications add to this lack of stability and reserve buoyancy, but the canopies of canvas and metal framing would have as well. From the NTSB, the safety board found no evidence to indicate that a stability evaluation was conducted after adding a metal frame canopy to the vessel while it was still in service in Groton and under Coast Guard jurisdiction. At the time, the regulations in Subchapter T concerning alterations and modifications did not specifically require testing the vessel after modifications. Before this accident, state laws did not address stability assessments, and state guidance documents contained vague language about assessments that were necessary if a public vessel was to be modified. If a stability assessment had been conducted after the canopy installations and modifications, it would have been necessary for shoreline cruises to reduce the passenger capacity and/or change the design of the canopies. From survivor interviews and its review of emergency room records, the safety board found that the average weight of the Ethan Allen's occupants on the day of the accident was almost 178 pounds, significantly more than the per-person weight standard of 140 pounds used to verify the allowable number of passengers in stability proof tests. The combination of the number of passengers permitted by the COI and the higher than assumed average weight of the people on board the Ethan Allen resulted in the vessel being significantly overloaded when it capsized. The safety board stability study, which used the current regulatory weight standard of 140 pounds per passenger, determined that the maximum number of persons that should have been allowed for the Ethan Allen was 14, or a total occupant capacity of about 2,000 pounds. On the day of the accident, however, the vessel carried 48 persons, 1 crew member and 47 passengers, averaging about 177.5 pounds each, or more than 8,000 pounds total weight, about 4 times its safe load carrying capacity. Now, it simply cannot be overstated that a rollover was just a matter of time. And the NTSB did not take a strong stance against the operator's actions, stating, "The attempt of the Ethan Allen operator to continue turning the vessel into the oncoming wake before the capsizing was a normal reaction to the circumstances, but not timely enough to be effective." It's likely safe to assume that had the vessel been operating within stability tolerances, these maneuvers wouldn't have caused such an exaggerated list. And in my view, it wouldn't have been within the operator's purview to go against clearly posted limits on the vessel's capacity plates, even if they were wrong. There were a couple exceptions though. First was drug and alcohol testing of the operator. From the NTSB, quote, "At the time of the accident, New York State did not require post-accident toxicological testing of mariners as a matter of course. However, in the case of an accident in which a passenger was seriously or fatally injured, a law enforcement official or the local district attorney could request a state superior court judge to compel toxicology testing through a court order, if he or she believed this was warranted. In this case, local and state officials did not ask the Ethan Allen operator to provide blood or urine samples, although he offered to submit to testing within an hour of the capsizing. On October 4, 2006, 2 days later, the NTSB asked that a toxicological test of the operator be accomplished, and the operator voluntarily submitted blood and urine samples for analysis. He told safety board investigators that he had consumed a glass of wine with his dinner the evening of the accident, but no alcohol after that time. Investigators sent the samples to the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, Civil Aerospace Medical Institute, or CAMI, in Oklahoma City for testing. The CAMI report indicated no positive results for legal and illegal drugs, and the urine analysis indicated the presence of an alcohol metabolite. But this amount of delay in a toxicology screening was an issue itself. The second issue being much confusion regarding whether the operator gave a safety briefing or not. From the NTSB, in this case, the vessel operator said that he gave a safety briefing before the Ethan Allen departed the dock at 2:30. All survivors reported that the operator did not perform a safety briefing. However, they admitted that they were all talking to each other while the boat was docked. End quote. And with the life jacket stowed in such a manner on this vessel as to take some time to access, with the speed at which the incident occurred, providing little to no reaction time for the passengers, it's unclear how effective a safety briefing would have been anyway. In addition, as stated earlier, investigators and even some survivors made it clear that, quote, if people had donned life jackets, more fatalities would have occurred because the only way for those trapped in the vessel to escape was to swim down and go through the open windows, which were now below water. One passenger told investigators that she initially was blocked by a plexiglass window, but was able to swim under it to escape the vessel. Presumably, at least one of the windows had freed itself in the chaos and swung into the closed position. The NTSB's investigation into this matter was finalized by October 15, 2005, roughly 2 weeks later. From the NTSB's probable cause, the National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable cause of the capsizing of the Ethan Allen was the vessel's insufficient stability to resist the combined forces of a passing wave or waves, a sharp turn, and the resulting involuntary shift of passengers to the port side of the vessel. The vessel's stability was insufficient because it carried 48 persons, where post-accident stability calculations demonstrated that it should have been permitted to carry only 14 persons. Contributing to the cause of the accident was the failure to reassess the vessel's stability after it had been modified because there was no clear requirement to do so. And number 7 from the NTSB's findings. The addition and subsequent modification of a canopy changed the Ethan Allen's stability characteristics. Now, this was in stark contrast to part of what New York State submitted as their findings and probable cause, stating, the vessel that became the Ethan Allen arrived in New York State with an erroneous capacity rating that was based on incomplete stability test data, resulting in a vessel that could not pass established safe passenger loading standards for 48 passengers it was rated to carry. Subsequent modifications to the vessel's canopy have been determined to have increased overall stability, resulting in a greater passenger capacity, but not to the established rating as specified in the original certificate of inspection. And this whole report comes off, to me at least, as just really strange, being that it's drafted in a very similar format to NTSB reports and makes claims counter to what investigators found. As always, links will be in description to all source material for this video if you'd like to check it out.
The litigations following mass casualty maritime events are perhaps some of the most complex matters in the legal industry. Maritime law is littered with decades or even centuries-old statutes and case law which can create obstacles for those affected by maritime disasters. My goal is to become the best high-stakes litigator. To do that, it's important to study the influential cases of the past and learn from them. In my upcoming new series, Justice Matters, continuing where Sam leaves off, we'll embark on a journey through maritime law exploring the exceptions and loopholes that vessel owners use to try to avoid liability. Part 2 of the Ethan Allen, for instance, will delve into those loopholes that vessel owners have under the Maritime Limitation of Liability Act. And we'll discuss those secret, outdated backdoors owners use to try to shield themselves from accountability. And spoiler alert, it doesn't always work. Not only did the Ethan Allen incident bring a civil lawsuit, but if you can believe it, there were actual criminal negligence charges that went all the way through a guilty plea. Now, Here's one burning question that you might be asking yourself about these legal proceedings. What exactly is the difference between civil negligence and criminal negligence? And how does a jury examine liability or guilt in each case? This is where things get really intriguing. We'll unpack these legal concepts and shed light on how juries navigate these two distinct paths of litigation in my new series. You'll want to make sure you're subscribed to the Attorney Tom channel so you don't miss the Ethan Allen legal sequel, because justice matters.
From the NTSB's recommendations to the U.S. Coast Guard, provide guidance to the states on U.S. Coast Guard standards for and assessment of stability of small passenger vessels. To New York State, address the safety deficiencies identified in the investigation of the Ethan Allen accident and issue technical guidance to vessel owners on inspection requirements for modified vessels, stability assessments and criteria, means for determining maximum safe load condition, drug and alcohol testing, manning, and safety briefings. Discontinue the use of capacity plate data associated with the U.S. Coast Guard's non-commercial boating standards for determining passenger loading on public vessels that carry more than 6 passengers, and adopt the Coast Guard's small passenger vessel inspection standards. Somewhat similar and reinforcing the NTSB's call for change was from the March 6, 2004 incident, the capsizing of the pontoon-style small passenger vessel Lady D in Baltimore Harbor. The safety board identified that the Coast Guard's passenger weight standard of 140 pounds used to assess the stability of vessels operating on protected waters posed a substantial safety risk for vessels carrying near the maximum number of permitted passengers. As a result, the NTSB made similar recommendations for that incident as well. Also, important to point out is that the Ethan Allen is actually up for sale, and on one of the broker sites, the posting's main photo is actually a photo from when the vessel was in NTSB custody. Just bizarre. Talk about out of touch. But that's the way we've always done it. In a bit of a brick and mortar op-ed, and I'll try to keep it short this time, no promises. But I can't say I've ever been to a workplace that, behind the scenes, that's the way we've always done it, wasn't the motto, at least occasionally, if not quite often. It's in our nature to take the path of least resistance, which is why it can immediately feel like anything that even remotely questions the way we've always done it can honestly at times feel threatening, because it involves change. It involves a different way of thinking. Sometimes it involves a new perspective on workplace culture that's existed in its state of stubbornness for decades, in extreme cases, centuries. It's not always malicious. I'd contend it's rarely malicious. We just tend to favor our routines. Many of us humans enjoy doing the bare minimum that'll get us home the soonest. A bit of a tangent here, but when I teach workplace safety in the classroom on various topics, one of my more subtle goals is for those attending to check egos at the door, and then another is to try and identify practices or procedures that don't have any explanation behind them other than, quote, "but that's the way we've always done it." The classes aren't held in a manner that these things are in people's faces. It's more team building exercises with strangers or coworkers they never expected to interact with. Like getting frustrated when driving in traffic at all those, quote, nobodies you're surrounded by, versus having the opportunity to get to know those fellow humans in a classroom, team-building environment. Would we use the same belittling insults in that situation, like we do when pointing out that idiot who should learn how to drive from the perceived safety of our climate-controlled box? When we challenge ourselves to think critically, we challenge our very nature of routine, of defense mechanisms, and overall groupthink. Yeah, you may sometimes be the odd person out when spotting something that looks unsafe, and that's okay. Oftentimes, safety is that philosophical battle between who's going to get home the soonest and look the coolest doing it, versus never getting to return home ever again. A poignant memorial for the Ethan Allen tragedy was founded near the Lake George Historical Association building and stands prominently to this day. A major part of why these videos don't have sponsors interrupting them, and yet the channel is able to continue the way it has is because of so many generous and kind supporters. And shout out to those top tier Patreon supporters: Alex S., Alex W., Andrew M., Andrew S., Christian T., Kenneth P., Manuel M., Nathan F., Nathan M., Paul R., P. Rush, Robert G., Drayson, and Troy H. And don't forget, your safety matters.